Good morning. Why don't we get our webinar started? First and foremost, I want to welcome everybody to our fifth webinar. To be honest, our webinar series has had really strong turnout, and I'm very happy that so many people are seeing the value of these very important informational settings. Today's seminar is titled Surviving COVID-19, Force Majeure. I think so many companies are faced with this question on force majeure. And today, we have around 120 attendees signed up. Again, it shows you that so many companies, members, executives, and people from the legal side are interested in really studying about what force majeure may be with COVID. Clearly, many businesses are having business disruptions, and we need some strong legal advice on exactly what we can, what we cannot do. We had our first webinar, 3-4 weeks ago, and it was really valuable to hear from different legal perspectives. And today, with the different partners from a very prestigious law firm called Shin and Kim to walk us through force majeure, this is what I call really, really priceless value. We also want to get back to business. Despite COVID-19, especially if we can focus on safety as a number one principle, we want to get back to work, in a proper, systematic, and a careful way. So I hope that today's discussion will allow us to do some of those things as well. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce Claudia Hong. She is a senior foreign attorney at Shin and Kim. I've had a chance to work very closely with her. I'm very impressed with her. She's also a co-chair of AMCHAM's Government and International Affairs Committee. And I can tell you that she's very passionate about helping all the member companies understand the legal dynamics and also to help all of you succeed in a post-COVID environment. So without further delay, hey, Claudia, this is your show, and I hope that we can all learn from today's valuable session. Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Hajang-nim, and special thanks to the entire AMCHAM team for making all of this possible. And of course, we appreciate all of you for tuning in this morning. Before we get started, a few housekeeping announcements. We're going to start with a pre-recorded session, and that'll take about 50 minutes. During this time, feel free to use the Q&A button, which can be found at the bottom of your screen, as you know. You can send us questions that way. And if there are any questions, we won't be able to answer them right away, but we'll be keeping track of them because at the end of the recording, my colleagues and I will be joining you live for about a 10-minute Q&A, and that'll be followed by closing remarks by AMCHAM. So let's get started. To put things into perspective, let's trace back some of the key markers in South Korea's experience with the COVID-19 pandemic. As you recall, the South Korea situation once looked pretty grim, with new cases skyrocketing daily, hitting an all-time high on February 29 with 909 cases, and a massive cluster of infections, making Korea the worst-hit country outside of China. A few days later, on March 3rd, the Korean government announced a $9.8 billion stimulus package, which, among other things, includes small and medium-sized business subsidies to help companies pay its workers, childcare subsidies, and even job retraining for people who've lost their jobs. A few weeks later, on April 8th, the Korean government announced a second economic relief package worth about $44 billion to boost the struggling domestic market and export industries. Which brings us to now. It's about a month and a half after the height of the pandemic here. South Korean President Moon Jae-in's ruling party, the Democratic Party of Korea, won an absolute majority in the recent parliamentary elections on April 15. In fact, many attribute such a landslide victory of the president's party to the success in this country's efforts to contain the new coronavirus. So what's the point here? The situation is rapidly evolving, not just in South Korea, but all over the world. So that's why it's critical to keep checking the latest developments affecting your specific business in Korea. And in the meantime, for our purposes today, we're going to focus on the top questions that our clients have been asking us over the last several weeks and months, and those issues that we've been monitoring closely since the outbreak began in late January. These most commonly questions relate to the real estate and hospitality sectors, insurance-related issues, and labor and employment challenges. So let's start with real estate. A lot has been talked about and how COVID-19 will likely reshape travel, tourism, and retail, but less so about real estate, which actually plays a greater role in the global economy. And here to talk to us about the impact of COVID-19 on the real estate sector are two of our most sought-after partners in our real estate practice. To my left is Mr. Robert Young. He's a senior foreign attorney in our market-leading real estate practice. Robert has been practicing for over 24 years and is a member of the State Bar of California. Robert has been advising foreign and domestic clients in Korea since 1998. And to his left is Mr. Kyoung KS Chang. KS is also a partner in our real estate practice, and KS has been practicing law for over 17 years. And while he's best known for his real estate practice, KS also regularly counsels foreign and domestic clients on M&A, as well as labor and employment-related matters. So thanks, gentlemen. Let's start with Robert. I understand that some of our real estate clients have been asking us about Korean government's measures to assist landlords specifically and tenants as well. So can you tell us a little bit more?
Sure. So there is the Infectious Disease Control and Prevention Act, which is not a new law that's been promulgated for COVID-19, but it has been in existence for a while. And under this law, the government, meaning the Ministry of Health and Welfare, mayor, governor, and heads of local districts can take certain measures to prevent spread of infectious disease, such as temporary closure, restrict entry by the general public, restrict movement within certain places, other measures to block passage, and also disinfection or other necessary measures. But if the government does order a premise to either shut down or to restrict access, the government is also required to compensate the affected persons for the losses incurred by that person. The compensation currently is limited to the costs of the facilities, equipment, and labor that became unavailable due to the government order. The government, however, can modify the scope of the compensation, and currently there is a bill pending at the National Assembly to amend the law to potentially expand the coverage and the scope to include, for instance, private business establishments. Given the results of the last election, I think there is belief that the scope of the coverage may be expanded pretty soon. So a person who's affected by the order is actually quite simple. Just needs to file an application with the relevant authority that ordered the closure. And then there is a deliberation committee that's been established. It was established on February 17th, specifically for COVID-19. They had a meeting on March 3rd. There's regular meetings where they will review the request for compensation and make a determination on what they think is a fair amount. If the affected person does not agree with the amount of losses that's been determined by the committee, they can appeal that within 90 days. So that's what's available under the existing Infectious Control and Prevention Act.
All right. Now, what about KS and Robert has talked about, government mandatory closures and restriction. What about cases where the landlord voluntarily decides to take action? Yeah. What can you tell us about that?
In case of the voluntary shutdown based on the government guidance or recommendation, the landlord will not be entitled to seek any compensation for any losses incurred by such shutdown. In that connection, the Korean Supreme Court has held that so long as the government or administrative guidance is just a non-binding recommendation premised on voluntary cooperation of counterparty, the government body issuing such recommendation or guidance will not be liable to compensate for loss. So pursuant to such court precedent, the landlord will not be entitled to seek any compensate for a loss incurred by each voluntary clause.
Are there any other measures, like you've, Robert, been talking about the Good Landlord Program? What is that?
So the Good Landlord Program, I think there's a similar program for HR as well, which my colleagues will discuss later. But for the Good Landlord Program, it's essentially the government incentivizing landlords to provide a rental reduction to tenants who request it. Now, the scope is somewhat limited because the landlord has to be a landlord that's owning and operating and registered to be in the leasing business of a commercial building. And the tenants are also limited to those that are specified in the presidential decree, which are generally small and medium businesses. So if a small and medium business tenant requests for rental reduction, and if the landlord agrees to that rental reduction, for the period currently from January to the end of June, that's it. But it may be, depending on how the COVID-19 progresses or how the country recovers, it may be extended. But currently it's up until end of June, and if the landlord provides a rental reduction, then 50% of that rental reduction can be offset in your income or corporate taxes.
You told me that some of our clients have been asking lease agreement related questions, their contracts, and this concept of force majeure. For those of us who don't deal with this on a daily basis, what is force majeure and what kinds of questions have our questions been asking on this?
Sure. So our real estate clients, the number one question they've been asking is about force majeure, and I'll just keep it simple.
Okay.
In layman terms, force majeure is essentially an act of God or some other event that's beyond the control of the parties that makes it impossible or difficult to perform under the contract.
Okay.
Many lease agreements do have a force majeure clause, and if the parties have agreed on the force majeure language, then that would prevail between those parties. If there is no provision on force majeure, there's similar concepts under Korean law and Korean precedents that would apply. In the context of leases, the force majeure, which has become somewhat of a boilerplate language, there hasn't been a whole lot of negotiations on force majeure up until now. I think going forward, that may not be the case. But under the current general force majeure provisions, COVID-19, unless the government orders closure, force majeure will likely not be triggered. Even if force majeure is triggered, the tenant would still be obligated, we believe, unless the agreement specifically provides otherwise, to pay rent. However, a lot of force majeure provisions also have a period. So it says if the force majeure event, without no fault of either party, continues for 90 days or 180 days or whatever the agreement specifies, then it could give either party the right to terminate the agreement. So that would be the case where there is a force majeure provision in the contract.
So as the COVID-19 pandemic forces business disruptions, businesses are finding themselves assessing both their losses and available remedies. And while contracts between the affected parties is the first place where businesses should be looking, not far behind should be a review of their insurance policies. And so here to talk to us through the insurance-related issues is John Kim. Now, John recently joined us as a senior foreign attorney in our growing insurance practice group. John has over 23 years of insurance-related experience, having held senior legal in-house positions in the US and in Korea. And he also has private practice experience in both countries. I also want to note for you that John serves as a co-chair of AMCHAM's Insurance Committee. Good morning, John.
Morning. Thank you, Claudia.
Thanks. So let's talk about how the insurance industry has been impacted by COVID-19 and how the business communities are utilizing insurance as they cope with the pandemic situation.
Right. So before I start, I want to proceed with an anecdote. While I was in New York City working at AIG, a senior executive actually once said that, quote unquote, insurance is oxygen. And that's a quite profound statement, very true statement as well, especially in today's situation. It is everywhere in our world. that is insurance. From a personal perspective, we wake up in the morning, we drive a car, we have car insurance. If we get sick or we're injured, we have health insurance to cover those risks. We also purchase life insurance for the security of our loved ones. And also from a commercial perspective, all the businesses survive on a daily basis with insurance being purchased. For instance, their property insurance, also liability insurance to third parties and so forth. So today, as we all cope with the COVID-19 situation, it's no different. And it's very relevant because the COVID-19 situation is actually taking the oxygen away from our lungs. It is also taking away the livelihood of the businesses. So it's a very relevant topic today. And just a snapshot of how it is impacting the global insurance markets today is, for instance, there's workers' compensation. Trust that there are going to be large multitudes of claims that are going to be lodged against insurers for workers' compensation. Those are the frontline people from those healthcare providers like doctors and nurses, ambulance drivers, people who are working in transportation, who are in the midst of the COVID-19 virus itself. We also have close to 150,000 deaths now worldwide, with about 230 in Korea. So you will also see an increase in life insurance claims being made against their life insurers. We have directors and officers insurance being affected. Your board of directors are going to make decisions on how to proceed with COVID-19. And if they make some imprudent decisions, there could be some shareholder claims as well that will rise. There is obviously the trade credit. If you're selling widgets from China to US and then the buyer does not pay, you may have a claim on trade credit insurance claims. Travel and leisure goes without saying. The airlines, the hotels, and so forth. You also have entertainment and leisure. So everything from football matches to concerts are all being canceled. So you're going to see also a number of claims in that respect as well. So I'm now going to speak. That was the macro discussion on the insurance. Now I'm going to focus a little bit more on a micro discussion, which is going to be on business interruption, which is an issue that has been raised quite frequently in the past few weeks by my clients and also by the firm's clients as well. They're asking about business interruption coverage, which is actually a type of commercial property insurance. Commercial property insurance that covers business income loss. Now, the business income loss is as a result of a slowdown or suspension of your business operations that also happens on your business premises. But the key critical element here is that there must be physical damage. It's a bit of an anomaly because we're talking about property insurance and business continuity, right? So it seems to be mixing apples with oranges. But actually, what we're speaking to is actual physical damage that occurs to the property that results in that loss. Now, in this coronavirus situation, the issue then becomes, does the virus cause some sort of physical damage to your property? And I'm going to speak a little bit more on that in the future slides, in some other case law and what's happening in Korea as well. And this is just a basic checklist. I'll just quickly run through. Review your insurance contract, look at the insuring clauses, make sure you have some coverage. If there's exclusions, you want to see if there's the exclusion that the insurers put in, which refers to the pandemics or the epidemics. If you're not so sure, look to your broker. The broker can help out. Here's my gratuitous plug. You can also ask your lawyer. Gather your supporting documentation because you will have to show and prove your quantum of damages. And if you do decide to send a notice of claim, make sure you do so in writing with a short summary. The insurer may come back with some questions and ask for more documentation. And be sure to dispatch it to the insurer because you may jeopardize your rights to the insurance proceeds. There's a plethora of cases out there where the plaintiffs have lost out because of late notices or incomplete notices. And lastly, just as the insurers have learned, you can learn, plan for the future. talk to your risk manager, your broker, and because there are products that cover this, if you're not covered, then you may want to protect yourself in the future.
Okay, great. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
So business disruptions and continuance issues also face our clients in the context of their role as an employer. Here to talk to us about some of the key issues and questions that our clients have been asking us over the last several weeks are two of our busiest partners at Shin and Kim. Mr. Michael Chang has been practicing law for over 23 years. He began his private practice in Australia and since 2002 has been counseling many foreign and domestic clients, particularly in the banking and finance area, but also regularly provides counsel to our clients on labor and employment-related issues. And next to him is the head of our labor and employment practice, Mr. Young-Seok, YS Key. YS has been practicing for over 19 years. And one thing I'd like to highlight about our labor and employment practice is that while we provide a full range of services, we're particularly strong in successfully resolving high-profile and contentious labor union and employee dispute situations. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Michael to talk to us about some key issues and implications of COVID-19.
Thank you, Claudia, and good morning to everyone. Young-Seok and I and the Labour team have been extremely busy over the last 3 months advising clients on a variety of issues, and they are ranging from the immediate issues, short-term, medium-term, and now that Korea is getting ahead of the curve or is ahead of the curve on the longer-term issues. And whilst Robert and John spoke about their respective topics, one thing that the COVID-19 issue has raised are some very serious issues with respect to human capital, human resource management, and their ongoing effects. Many of you will have a crisis management plan. It'll be a global plan, and for those who've had the benefit of one, you have been quite well prepared. But for some of our clients, they haven't had the benefit, and they come to us and say, so what do we do in Korea? Yeah. And we've got 3 key concepts that we'd like to relay to everyone to bear in mind. The first is protect. The second is be proactive. And the third is to manage. In terms of protect, again, as Korea is ahead of the curve, all of you have probably no doubt implemented some type of measure, whether it be to work from home or limit travel, etc. But the key here is Korean companies have a general duty to ensure that they provide a safe work environment. Failure to do so exposes the company to possible civil liabilities and, in certain limited circumstances, possible liabilities for the directors. The issue now is, and people turn to focus on some of the HR management issues, and in this regard, labour unions and dealing with the negotiation of CBAs is becoming something that employees are turning their mind to and should be turning their minds to the extent that they have a labour union or the possibility of a labour union being established because employees don't feel that they're being provided enough protection. Yep. And this is one of Young-Seok's key expertise areas, and I'll turn over to him.
Yes, in Korea, the labor unions can present very difficult issues. In order to implement certain proactive measures to overcome the financial crisis, as Michael mentioned before, if there is a labor union, the company needs to obtain the union's consent or amend the CBA. If the company has multiple unions or minority union, the issues are getting more complicated. But the union will likely be very reluctant to change their CBA. In such case, as an alternative, the company may wish to offer or negotiate some concessions with the labor union. For example, if the company wishes not to pay a bonus for this year or intended to reduce salary, the company may offer alternative proposal to make compensation for the difference next year if the company earns net profit. In these troubling times, it would be important to negotiate in good faith with the labor union to maintain and build trust between the union and the management.
I think one area that we can finish off on is longer term companies are redesigning their business models. They're having a look at them, and post COVID-19, how do they survive and remain profitable? And there are issues of loss of productivity due to the COVID-19, people from working home, the disturbance that has created. And whilst a lot of companies will be considering, when they're redesigning their business models, the key areas of their customers in terms of their value proposition and also their value capabilities. The one aspect of that is the HR aspects, their labour force, how to manage them and how to get the best out of them. And in this respect, there is a range of issues that are coming up. Do we allow them to continue to work from home? Because it's been not as bad as everyone thought it was going to be. And does that mean we can save on floor space? People can save time on commute, et cetera, et cetera. But there are the issues that Young-Seok raised earlier about privacy and how do you monitor them, the employees, and how do you calculate overtime, et cetera, et cetera. So it's complicated. But one thing is, when companies are redesigning their business models or looking at their business models, that they carefully consider their HR, employment, and the management of their employees.
Great. Anything else? Okay, thanks, Michael and YS. Actually, I want to thank all of my 5 colleagues for their prepared presentations today. And we're going to now head over to a live Q&A. We're going to go right into the Q&A session. And it looks like while the recording was playing, we had several of you giving us questions, so we appreciate that. Since we got abruptly ended with HR, let's start with HR. Okay, Ki-byung-sa님, I'm going to ask you for your help with the first one, if that's okay.
Yes.
It deals with privacy issues and employees working from home. Question is this: can the company monitor or record the employees' work from home on a real-time basis?
Yes. Monitoring work at home is more complicated because home is a very private space. Generally speaking, if the company obtains a specific consent from the employee and it is necessary and reasonable, it would be permitted. Especially if electronic or verbal communication is monitored in real time, the company needs to obtain specific consent from all participants in such communication. Please note that comprehensive and general consent could be challenging.
Okay, thanks, YS. I think the keywords are consent and reasonableness. So we're going to move on now and switch over to real estate, if that's okay. Chang and can I ask for your help on this? I think we got several questions actually on the real estate portion, and there seem to be 2 that are related. It's about rent reductions and early termination of leases due to COVID-19. So on the rent reductions, Is a tenant entitled to reduce their rent due to a decrease in customer traffic or reduced business?
Mm,
And then is early termination allowed under the COVID-19 situation?
yeah, in connection with the first question regarding the rental reduction, it may be difficult unless the lease agreement specifically allows such rental reduction. Although the Korean Civil Code stipulates the tenant's right to request the rent reduction in case of the material changes in the economic circumstances, the cases where the court admit such rental reductions are very rare. Therefore, tenants' requests of the rental reduction due to decrease in customer traffic or business would not be accepted by the court. However, if the current situation would continue for a long time, there's a possibility that the court would admit such rental reduction. And in connection with the second question of the lease termination due to COVID-19, actually it depends on the relevant provisions in the lease agreement in principle. However, in general, the COVID-19 situation itself would not constitute forced merger where the landlord or tenant may terminate the lease agreement.
Okay, thanks, Kies. So it sounds like one, if you have a nice landlord and you have and who agrees to work with you commercially, that can be an option. And the other is to look specifically to your contracts. So I guess read carefully before signing, right? Okay. So we also have a question on insurance, or two actually. John, let's start with the first one. So let's talk about similar situations where the tenants are not able to pay their monthly rent. In a commercial office building setting, will business interruption insurance cover the situation when tenants are not able to pay due to the negative impact of COVID-19, John?
Sure, Claudia. In terms of rental income and in relation to the business interruption, rental income is actually a fixed income that you can declare, and it would likely be covered under the business interruption coverage under your package insurance policy. Now, the caveat is that you need to look at every policy on a stand-by-stand basis, and you will also have to check whether there exclusions exist for the pandemic or epidemic infectious disease exclusion. If that's the case, then you may have some issues and challenges in claiming lost income in that sense. And remember, you have to also prove under this property cover that it is has to have some physical damage to the property. Now, if you're going to claim the lost income for the rental as just an economic downturn, there's really the absence of the physical damage missing as an element here. There was a case that was lodged in the US for the French Laundry restaurant in Napa Valley, where they actually claimed that their restaurant premises were infected by the virus, the COVID-19 virus, and for that reason, it damaged their property. The virus actually sat on their chairs, the tables, the kitchen, the walls, and so forth, and that was the damage that they claimed. But in the sense of a real estate owner who is lost income for the rentals, then there may be a difficult challenge in trying to prove the physical damage aspect. Now, there appears to be another question on whether or not, if the insurers are starting to deny claims for business interruption, whether there would be any governmental intervention. Interestingly, some countries are taking very, very aggressive approaches. And as I mentioned earlier in the recording, the state of New York and the assembly there has put forth a bill to nullify and void any exclusions that seem to target and exclude coverage for the virus itself. Currently here in Korea, my sense would be that from the Blue House down to the National Assembly and the financial regulators, they're probably watching this and also possibly considering this as another option to provide relief to the businesses. But at this time, to the best of my belief, I just don't have any information on that right now. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. I'm going to switch over to switch back to real estate and ask Robert this question. Is there a legal requirement, Robert, for businesses to report COVID-19 cases?
There is. It would apply to managers, executives, or representatives of a business office, place of business, including restaurants. So it would apply to landlords, tenants, and I think also the asset managers. And so if they become aware of a spread of infectious disease on their premises, there is a requirement to file a report with the relevant government authority. Failure to do so, you could be subject to a criminal fine of up to 2 million won.
Great, thanks, Robert. Okay, I'm going to switch back to HR, if that's okay. Michael, can you help us with this one? It's about bonuses. If the company intends to reduce the bonus this year and make whole next year, is that permissible?
Yeah, I suppose it's a pertinent question for many, as it is bonus season for some companies. Look, ultimately you have to look at the bonus scheme rules to see what the company can do there. Generally speaking, if the company has absolute discretion in terms of the bonuses, then yes, you can delay the bonus. But the question is whether the company really has substantively absolute discretion. That is something that you need to look at carefully and speak to your counsel about.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Again, it sounds like it depends on whether the company has absolute discretion. If not, you need employee consent. Do we have time for more? Maybe one more? Okay, I'm gonna stick with HR and I'm gonna ask one about, let's see, do we have any more? Okay, about labor unions. Okay, let me ask you as our labor union expert on this question. Question is, by agreement with the labor union, can the company be exempt from the obligation to pay bonus, which has already been accrued to the employees?
Yeah, the answer is no. The labor union has no authority to reduce or forgo the wages already due and payable, because such wages are the sole property of each employee. The company must obtain individual consent from each employee.
Is that it?
Yes.
All right, so I think we are out of time, and thanks to many of you for staying on with us. I'm gonna now turn the mic over to AMCHAM.
Thank you, everyone from Shin and Kim for sharing such useful information. Thank you, everyone, for participating with us. Before you go, if you could spend maybe 10 seconds filling out our live survey on the screen, it would be greatly appreciated. And please tune in for our next, which is the 6th series of webinar on the 27th, which is Tuesday, I believe, at 1 p.m. So you can get detailed information from our website, and please do fill out the live survey for us. And thank you very much. You guys did a wonderful job.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.